I remember my 35th birthday like it was yesterday, even though the memory now stings. I had spent years pouring my heart, sweat, and every penny I had into our home, a place that I believed was built on our shared dreams. That day, our living room was filled with family and friends gathered to celebrate what was supposed to be a special day for me. I sat at the head of the long dining table, feeling the warmth of familiar faces around me. The house was buzzing with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses as we all enjoyed the moment. Then Lauren, my wife, with a smile that seemed too bright and a bit too forced, stepped forward. In her hands, she held a beautifully wrapped silver envelope. "Go on, open it," she urged in a voice that was almost too sweet. I expected a sentimental note, perhaps a heartfelt letter, or even a surprise trip, something that would make the day even more memorable. With a slight hesitation and a curious heart, I peeled open the envelope. What I found inside hit me like a cold slap. There, printed in stark, unyielding letters, was an eviction notice. The words burned into my mind. I sat there frozen as I realized what I was reading. Lauren was kicking me out of my own home. The room fell silent for a moment as confused murmurs began to spread among the guests. My best friend Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around as if he sensed the rising tension. My in-laws, Margaret and Robert, exchanged uneasy glances, and even my brother Daniel could not meet my eyes. I felt a mix of disbelief and pain welling up inside me, but something else stirred there too, a quiet resolve. I looked directly at Lauren, letting my steady gaze say more than words ever could. Then, almost as if on cue, I smiled, a small, knowing smile that held a promise. I reached for a document I had prepared long before this day and slid it slowly onto the table in front of me. "You really should have checked the deed, darling," I said softly. The room seemed to hold its breath as Lauren's forced smile faltered. Her eyes widened in shock as she scanned the paper. I had already sold the house, the very house that she now claimed as her own. And to make things even clearer, I added, "And the new landlord? He's moving in today." The sound of those words echoed in the silence that followed. I watched as confusion turned to anger on Lauren's face. Every person in the room was now staring at us. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to come up with an explanation, but nothing came. I had been ready for this moment, and every detail had been carefully planned. I had known for some time that Lauren's behavior had changed, her sudden interest in money, secret meetings with a lawyer, and even her unexplained spending sprees had all been small clues that something was amiss. When I discovered her real estate agent's number in her call log, I knew the truth. Lauren had been plotting to take control of what I had built. In that moment, as I sat there with a calm expression that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions around me, I realized that I had turned her own trap against her. While she thought this envelope was meant to humiliate me on my birthday, I had prepared a countermove that left her with nothing. The document on the table wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that I had sold the house, and it marked the beginning of my new life. The realization was simple, yet powerful. I was no longer the victim. I had taken back control of everything that was rightfully mine, and I had done it on my own terms. As the guests exchanged whispers and shocked looks, I could feel the shift in the room. The plan was complete. With each second that passed, the weight of betrayal lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a sense of clarity and empowerment. My family, who had once been caught up in the drama of a happy birthday celebration, now bore witness to a turning point. A moment when I decided that I would no longer let someone else dictate my life. The eviction notice, the silver envelope, and even the forced smile on Lauren's face had all been pieces in a puzzle that I had solved long before this day. It was a day that was meant to be mine, yet it had nearly become the worst day of my life, until I flipped the script. Now, as I sat there at that table with a quiet smile playing on my lips, I knew that the future belonged to me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone tried to process what had just happened. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost suffocating. Lauren's face, once filled with a forced smile, now showed clear shock and disbelief. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for answers, and she looked as if she might collapse under the weight of the truth. What is this?" she managed to say, her voice trembling as she clutched the eviction notice as if it were a magic talisman that could make everything go back to normal. I took a slow, deep breath and spoke calmly, trying to keep my voice even. "The new owner will be here soon," I said. My tone was steady, almost too calm for a moment like this. "You have 30 minutes to pack your things." The words felt heavy as they left my lips, and I could see that they hit her hard. She turned to her parents, looking for support, or perhaps some form of help. "Mom? Dad?" she asked, her voice now barely above a whisper. Margaret, my mother-in-law, reached for the papers with a shaking hand. Her eyes filled with worry as she tried to make sense of what she was reading. "Lauren, you said you own this house too," she said, her voice quivering with uncertainty. I shook my head slightly and took another sip of my drink, letting the cool liquid help steady my resolve. "She doesn't," I explained softly. "I bought the house before we got married, and I never put your name on the deed." I could see Lauren's composure beginning to crumble. Her eyes widened, and she looked lost for words, the truth hitting her like a tidal wave. "But you said, we were supposed to," she tried to protest, her voice faltering as she grasped for any way to twist the truth back in her favor. I cut her off gently, yet firmly. "You wanted to humiliate me on my birthday?" I said, each word measured and calm. "Instead, you lost everything." I glanced around the room and saw my brother Daniel let out a low whistle of disbelief. Ethan, who had sat next to me all this time, shook his head slowly with an expression that mixed shock with a kind of silent admiration. "Damn, man, that's a checkmate," Ethan murmured, his tone full of both surprise and approval. The room was filled with murmurs and quiet gasps. Every face showed a mix of disbelief, disappointment, and, in some cases, relief that the truth was finally out. It was as if the carefully built illusion that had held the family together for so long was now shattering before our eyes. I could see some people leaning forward, as if they were trying to catch every word, while others kept their eyes downcast, not wanting to face the harsh reality. Lauren's eyes flitted from one person to another, and I could tell that she was searching desperately for any sign that someone would understand or help her. Instead, she found only the cold truth staring back. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible, almost drowned out by the quiet murmur of the room. But her words were empty now, meaningless against the reality of what I had revealed. I let silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting every person in the room absorb the weight of my words. My own heart beat steadily, calm and even, as if the storm raging around us had no power over me anymore. I felt a strange relief, a deep satisfaction in knowing that the truth was finally out. It was not just a victory for me, but also a cleansing moment for everyone who had been forced to watch the charade. Looking at Lauren, I saw the fragile remnants of her plans falling apart. Her face, once so full of carefully rehearsed smiles and confident expressions, now looked pale and defeated. The room was no longer a stage for her to display power and control. Instead, every person there now saw her for who she truly was, a person who had tried to manipulate and hurt me, and in the end, had only hurt herself. I could still hear faint whispers as some people started to speak among themselves. "I can't believe it," someone said softly, while another remarked, "I always knew something was off." The words made it clear that the illusion had finally been broken. The air was charged with an energy that was a mix of shock, judgment, and even a touch of sympathy. But none of that changed the fact that the truth was out, and there was no going back. In that moment, I realized that this was more than just a personal victory over betrayal. It was a turning point, a moment when every lie and every deceit was exposed. The carefully maintained world that Lauren had tried to control was now unraveling, thread by thread, right before our eyes. I stayed quiet for a while longer, letting the silence fill the space between us. I could see the confusion in Lauren's eyes, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the eviction notice, and it reminded me that while the truth can be a powerful weapon, it is also a harsh and unforgiving one. Yet, I had no regrets. I had done what I needed to do, and I had done it with a calm and clear mind. Slowly, the room began to accept the new reality. The shock was giving way to a kind of resigned understanding. People started whispering to each other about how everything had changed, about how they had always suspected that things were not as they seemed. Even though there were no words that could bring back the way things were, there was a sense that, finally, justice had been served. As I looked around, I felt a deep sense of clarity. The truth was now clear for everyone, and the weight of deception had been lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer trapped in a web of lies spun by someone I had once trusted. The future, though uncertain, now seemed like a blank page waiting to be written with honesty and strength. In that quiet aftermath, as I sat back and let the events of the day settle, I knew that nothing could ever be the same again. The truth had unfolded in a way that left no room for second chances or hidden secrets. And while the pain of betrayal still lingered in the room like a cold shadow, it was now balanced by the warm glow of freedom, the freedom to live life on my own terms, with nothing left to hide. The room was still shaking with whispers and unsettled glances as I sat there, trying to process the sudden turn of events. The shock that had gripped everyone was slowly giving way to a heavy, sinking feeling, and I could tell that my family and friends were struggling to come to terms with what had happened. I could see the pain and disappointment in their eyes, and I knew that this was not just about me. It was about the fragile trust that had been broken by Lauren's cruel game. Lauren herself was the center of the storm. I watched as her expression changed from anger to desperation. Her eyes darted around, searching for any sign of support or a way out, but all she found were looks of dismay and disbelief. "What do I do now?" she stammered, her voice small and wavering as if she were suddenly a child lost in a big, confusing world. I could see that her carefully built plans were crumbling. The faces around the table showed different emotions. Some people looked sad, others looked angry, and a few even seemed relieved, as if they had secretly hoped for this moment of truth. My brother Daniel let out a low whistle that was more an expression of shock than admiration, while Ethan shook his head slowly, his eyes reflecting a mix of disappointment and a strange kind of respect. In that moment, I felt an unexpected calm. I knew that what had just happened was the result of choices made long ago. Lauren had planned to humiliate me on my birthday, but I had been prepared. And now, with the truth on the table, I felt a sense of clarity that I had not known in a long time. I leaned back in my chair and watched as the conversation around me started to take on a new tone. Some people began to speak quietly among themselves, trying to understand the full picture. "I always thought something was wrong," one of them said softly, while another murmured, "I never believed she could do something like this." The room was filled with a low hum of conversation that, despite its softness, carried the weight of judgment and disapproval. I knew that this was the fallout from years of secrets and lies, and that now everyone had to face the truth. I could see my in-laws, Margaret and Robert, exchanging glances that spoke of disappointment and regret. They had once believed that our home was a happy place, a safe haven built on shared dreams, but now those illusions were shattered. Their silence said more than any words could, and I felt both a pang of sorrow and a firm resolve that nothing would ever be the same again. Lauren tried to speak several times, her voice trembling as she attempted to justify herself, or perhaps beg for forgiveness, but every time she opened her mouth, the words died before they could leave. It was clear to everyone that she had lost control not just of the house, but of the narrative that she had tried so hard to create. The ripple effects of her betrayal were now being felt by everyone present. Even those who had once supported her were now distancing themselves, unable to look past the betrayal that was plain as day. In that heavy silence, I realized that this was a turning point. The fallout was not just the crumbling of a plan. It was the end of an era. I was no longer the man who had to live under the shadow of deceit and false promises. I was the one who had taken a stand, who had turned the tables on a plan that was meant to humiliate me. My voice, steady and calm, cut through the quiet as I addressed the room. "I know this is hard to believe," I said, choosing my words slowly and deliberately, "but everything that has happened is the result of choices that were made long before today. I have been watching, and I have been ready. This is not about revenge for revenge's sake. It is about truth, and it is about me finally taking back control of my life." I could see some faces soften at my words, while others remained fixed in disbelief. But in that moment, I felt certain that I had done what was necessary. I had exposed the truth, and while it hurt, it also freed me from a web of lies that had bound me for too long. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, filled with a mix of regret, sorrow, and a hint of relief. I sat quietly as Lauren's eyes filled with tears, and I wondered if she realized that the person she had tried to destroy was still standing, stronger than ever. There was no dramatic confrontation or loud accusations, only the quiet, steady sound of the truth taking hold. I could feel my heart beating steadily as I watched the scene unfold, knowing that the fallout would not end here. The truth would spread beyond this room, touching everyone who had once believed in the carefully crafted image of our life together. But for now, I let the silence speak for itself. I let the heavy, lingering sadness mix with a sense of liberation. I knew that this was just the beginning of a long process of healing and rebuilding, not only for me, but for everyone who had been caught up in this painful drama. In that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer allow betrayal to dictate my life. I would use this fallout as a catalyst for change, a chance to rebuild on my own terms, and to move forward with honesty and strength. Even as the whispers grew louder and the tension in the room became almost unbearable, I held on to that promise. I sat there with a quiet determination, knowing that while the fallout was painful, it was also necessary. The truth, once set free, had a way of clearing the air and paving the way for a new beginning. And so, in that heavy silence, as everyone around me tried to come to grips with what had happened, I found my own voice, a voice that was steady, calm, and full of the promise of a better tomorrow. A sudden knock at the door cut through the heavy silence, and all eyes in the room turned as one. The tension that had built up over the past few moments seemed to pause at that sound. I could feel my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the knowledge that everything was about to change yet again. In the doorway stood a tall, confident woman with a warm yet firm smile that spoke of authority and control. It was Angela Reese, the new owner and landlord of the house, the very house that had once been the center of our life together. As she stepped inside, her presence filled the room, and I could see Lauren's breath catch in her throat. Her eyes widened as she tried to understand what was happening. Angela's voice was clear and matter-of-fact. "Everything's in order," she announced, addressing the room as if she were giving a routine update. "I will give you a day to clear out your personal items." Her words were calm, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. I could see Lauren's face drain of color, her carefully maintained expression crumbling before everyone's eyes. She looked at me as if I were someone unrecognizable, someone who had betrayed her completely. You sold our house to her?" she sputtered, her voice a mixture of shock and anger. I met her gaze steadily, a small, knowing smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Correction," I said softly but firmly, "this is my house." In that moment, every illusion she had clung to was shattered. The control she had so desperately tried to maintain slipped away, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. I had worked carefully and long before this day to plan every detail. I knew what she was up to, and I had prepared a counter that she could never imagine. Now, as Angela's presence confirmed the finality of the situation, Lauren's plans crumbled even further. The new landlord, Angela, was not just a symbol of my victory. She was a living reminder that the future no longer belonged to the manipulations and deceit that had once defined our home. The room was filled with a stunned silence as everyone absorbed what had just been revealed. I could sense relief in the eyes of those who had long seen through the facade, and even some of the anger in the room had shifted towards Lauren's desperate attempts to hold on to power. Angela's calm demeanor and clear authority left no room for debate. Her confident smile and clear instructions told everyone that the matter was now closed. I stood there quietly, feeling both the satisfaction of a plan well executed and the weight of the finality of this new chapter in my life. This was not just about selling a house. It was about taking back control of my destiny. For years, I had poured my heart and every hard-earned penny into that home. It had been a place of dreams, memories, and, ultimately, betrayal. Tonight, however, that chapter was ending. With Angela's words still hanging in the air, I saw that Lauren's last shred of control was slipping away, and it was clear to everyone present that her carefully plotted plans had been undone. My voice, steady and calm, carried a finality that echoed in the silent room. "Lauren," I said softly, "everything is over." There was no need for harsh words or angry accusations. The truth had already been made clear by the facts and by Angela's confirmation. I had planned for this moment for a long time, and now that the scales had finally tipped, I was free to step forward into a new life, one where I would no longer be held hostage by lies or manipulated by deceit. Angela's presence marked the final blow. As I looked at her, I saw in her eyes a promise of fairness and new beginnings. For me, it was a fresh start, a clean slate where I could rebuild my life without the burdens of past betrayals. And for Lauren, it was the moment when all her schemes and manipulations had finally come to an end. Her face, which had once been so full of forced smiles and feigned confidence, now showed a mixture of shock, anger, and despair. The room, once again filled with whispers and soft murmurs, felt different now. It was as if a heavy curtain had been drawn aside, revealing the stark reality that had been hidden behind layers of pretense for far too long. I felt a deep sense of relief as the truth settled in. I was finally free from the chains of betrayal and the sting of humiliation. Angela's calm authority had sealed the fate of the past, and in that moment, I realized that the future was mine to shape. I did not need to raise my voice or fight any longer. The evidence was clear, the plan was complete, and the outcome was undeniable. As I watched Angela calmly move further into the room, handling the practical details of the transition, I knew that nothing could undo what had been done. This was the final blow to the life that Lauren had tried so desperately to control. In the quiet that followed, I took a deep breath and embraced the calm certainty of a new beginning. Every whispered conversation, every exchanged glance in the room, confirmed that a significant change had occurred. I had taken back control of my life, my house, my future, my destiny, and now, with the past firmly behind me, I looked ahead to a future built on honesty, strength, and the simple truth that sometimes, the final blow is the first step to freedom. I watched as Lauren sat there, utterly speechless, for the first time completely lost for words. Her plan to control everything had failed, and now her face showed nothing but defeat and confusion. I stood up slowly and met her eyes, my voice calm, and even as I spoke, "You played your hand, and you lost. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a new place to move into." There was no need for anger or loud accusations, just the clear truth that the life we once shared was over. Ethan, always the loyal friend, stepped over and clapped my shoulder gently. "Let me help you pack up the last of your things," he said, his tone warm and supportive. His gesture spoke louder than words, and for a moment, it felt like I wasn't completely alone in the midst of the chaos. Meanwhile, Margaret and Robert, Lauren's parents, stood silently in the background. Their eyes avoided their daughters, as if to say that disappointment and regret filled the space between them. I could see the heavy sadness in their faces, a silent judgment for the way things had turned out. Lauren, who had once prided herself on having everything under control, now looked small and broken. She sank into a nearby chair, her hands trembling as if she were trying to hold on to the remnants of a plan that was no longer hers. I felt a strange mix of emotions. The pain of betrayal, yes, but also a deep, steady relief that I had finally taken back control. All my hard work, the years spent building a home that was more than just a structure, had not been in vain. Every nail, every brick, and every memory had been mine, and now, I was free to create a future that belonged solely to me. I walked over slowly and began to collect the few personal items I had left in that house. A framed photo here, a worn book there. Each piece was a reminder of a time when things were different, when I believed in the dreams we once shared. But those days were gone, and as I gathered my belongings, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift off my shoulders. The house, which had once been the heart of my life, was now just an empty shell that echoed with lost promises and shattered hopes. With every step I took to pack up the remaining items, I recalled how I had worked tirelessly, day after day, pouring my sweat and savings into making this house a home. It was my sanctuary, built with hope and determination. Yet, now it had become the stage for the betrayal I had long suspected was coming. Lauren had wanted everything for herself. She had dreamed of controlling every part of our life together, even planning secret moves behind my back. But I had been watching, and I had prepared. I had already sold the house long before she ever had a chance to use it as a weapon against me. As I loaded a small box into my car, I felt a calm certainty about the future. The pain of what had happened would always be there, but it was now mixed with a powerful sense of freedom. I no longer belonged to a place tainted by lies and deceit. I was free to rebuild my life in a way that was honest and true to who I am. Ethan helped me lift the box into the trunk, his support reassuring me that I was not making this move out of anger alone, but from a desire to start over. I took one last look at the house. The windows stared back at me like empty eyes, and the silence that filled each room was almost comforting now, a quiet promise that the past was over. Lauren's world had crumbled around her, and with it, the illusion of the perfect life she had tried so hard to control. I did not feel triumph in her misery, but rather a deep, solemn relief that I was finally free to move on. I stepped out into the cool night air, feeling the gentle caress of the breeze and the soft glow of streetlights guiding my way. In that moment, I realized that every moment of betrayal, every lie, had led me here, to a fresh start and to a life that I would build on my own terms. The hurt was still there, but it was now mixed with hope. I promised myself that I would take this chance to create a new home, a new life, one free from the chains of deceit and full of honesty and strength. As I drove away, the road stretched out before me, dark yet inviting, a symbol of the unknown future I was ready to embrace. I had lost a home, yes, but I had gained something much more valuable, the freedom to choose my own path. I smiled faintly to myself, knowing that no matter what came next, I was finally in control of my own destiny. The night carried away the echoes of the past, and with each mile, I felt lighter, ready to step into a future built solely on my truth. The days that followed that fateful night were heavy with a strange mix of silence and uncertainty. I woke up each morning feeling the weight of what had happened still pressing on my chest, but also a quiet determination that things would not remain the same. I had spent so many years building that home with my own hands and hard-earned money, and now, in the wake of Lauren's final betrayal, I had to face the truth that it was truly over. In the quiet of my new morning routine, I found myself looking at the empty spaces where memories once lived, feeling both the loss and the hope of something new. I took long walks around the neighborhood that had once been filled with the warmth of family and shared dreams, but now felt cold and hollow. Each step on the pavement reminded me that the past was gone and that I was alone with my thoughts, my regrets, and a growing spark of liberation. I called a few of my closest friends, those who had silently supported me through the chaos, to talk about what was next. Ethan's voice was gentle and reassuring when he said, "You did what you had to do, man. It's time to let the hurt go and look ahead." His words, simple and honest, resonated with me as I began to realize that the true aftermath of this ordeal was not just the destruction of what once was, but also the chance to rebuild and redefine my life. My family, too, was trying to process everything in their own way. I could see the disappointment and sadness in the eyes of my brother Daniel, and even in the worried glances of those who had once supported Lauren. Conversations with them were slow and hesitant, filled with careful words that tried to bridge the gap between the old life and the new. In these quiet moments, I found strength in the simple truth that I was finally free. Free from the lies, free from the manipulation, and free to start over without the burden of a painful past. I spent hours reflecting on all the nights when I lay awake, wondering if I would ever escape the cycle of betrayal and humiliation. Now, in the soft glow of dawn, I realized that the aftermath of Lauren's schemes was not a curse but a turning point. I began to sort through the remnants of what had been my home, a task that was both cathartic and painful. Every item I packed away, every corner I tidied, became a symbol of letting go. The old furniture, the worn-out picture frames, even the familiar scent that once brought comfort now spoke of a chapter closed. I remember sitting on the front steps of what was once our house, the cool morning air whispering promises of renewal. I thought about how I had given so much of myself to build that life, only to have it shattered in one swift move. Yet, in that same moment, I also felt the stirring of a new beginning. The silence of the empty rooms was not a void but an invitation to start again, to create a place that truly reflected who I was now, someone who valued honesty and strength above the glitter of false promises. I began to make plans for my future, small steps at first, a new apartment, a fresh coat of paint on a space that I could call my own, a simple kitchen where I could cook and laugh without fear. I took time to write down my thoughts, simple words on paper that slowly turned into a blueprint for the new life I wanted to build. Each word, each sentence, was a promise to myself that I would no longer allow betrayal to shape my days. Friends and family offered their support in small ways, a visit, a phone call, or just a shared cup of coffee in the early morning. I listened to their advice and tried to let go of the bitterness that had once threatened to consume me. I found comfort in the idea that sometimes the hardest endings are the ones that lead to the brightest beginnings. The aftermath was not just about mourning what I had lost. It was about embracing the freedom that came with knowing that I was now the sole keeper of my destiny. I learned to smile at memories without feeling trapped by them, to honor the past without letting it dictate my future. Slowly, the ache of loss turned into a quiet determination, and the pain of betrayal transformed into a resolve to live on my own terms. I started to see that each day was a blank page, ready to be filled with new experiences, honest relationships, and the kind of peace that comes from understanding who you are. In the soft light of each new morning, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, leaving behind the ghost of a life built on deceit. The aftermath of that bitter night had become the fertile soil in which a stronger, truer version of myself could grow. I knew that the road ahead would not always be smooth, but every step I took was a step away from the hurt and towards a future that was mine alone. And in that simple truth, I found a quiet, enduring hope that promised better days ahead. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm, one that felt freer and more honest than I had ever known before. I now lived in a bright, modern condo that I had chosen as my fresh start. Every morning, I woke up to a city skyline that promised endless possibilities. I'd come to learn that sometimes, a hard ending is the only way to begin anew. I often sat by the large window, sipping on a glass of smooth whiskey, letting the quiet hum of the city soothe me. It was during these moments of stillness that I heard news about Lauren. A few weeks back, a friend casually mentioned that she had moved back in with her parents. Her credit was ruined, she no longer held a job, and her secret boyfriend had vanished without a trace. The news stung less than I expected. It was, in fact, a confirmation that her carefully laid plans had completely fallen apart. I remembered that day as if it had just happened, the day I had finally taken back control. On my birthday, in front of everyone, I had turned the tables. I had revealed that the home I had built with my own blood, sweat, and savings was mine alone, that I had sold it long before Lauren ever thought of using it as a weapon. I had delivered my checkmate, not with loud words or angry threats, but with the cold, clear logic of truth. I recalled Ethan's quiet nod of approval, Daniel's low whistle of disbelief, and even the soft murmurs from family members who had once blindly believed Lauren's lies. In that moment, I had felt a deep sense of relief, an inner certainty that I was no longer a victim of betrayal. Now, as I looked back from the safe haven of my new home, I realized that life had a way of balancing the scales. I sat at a small table in my living room, the one I had picked out with care, and opened a new journal. The pages were empty, waiting for fresh thoughts and dreams. I wrote in simple words about the freedom I felt, about how every decision I made from that day on would be mine alone. I remembered the bittersweet taste of revenge, served cold on my birthday, and I smiled. Some people always say revenge is best served cold, and I had done just that, wrapped it neatly with a bow on top. But as I scribbled down my plans for the future, I realized that the victory was not about causing pain to Lauren. It was about reclaiming my life, about building a future free from lies and manipulation. I began to plan small steps for the coming days. I looked into a new apartment that was both cozy and modern, a place that would soon become my true home. I reached out to friends and even reconnected with those who had supported me through the darkest times. Their simple words of encouragement warmed my heart. "You did the right thing," Ethan had said, clapping me on the back with a grin that spoke of genuine respect. I realized that the fallout of that bitter night had, in its own way, brought me closer to the people who truly cared about me. Every encouraging message, every supportive call, was a reminder that life goes on, and that I had the strength to shape it the way I wanted. I often took long walks in the early mornings, feeling the cool breeze brush past me as I thought about how far I'd come. The old home, once the battleground of betrayal, had become a memory, a chapter closed forever. The pain had been real, but so had been the growth that came from facing it head-on. I learned that sometimes, winning isn't about taking something away from someone else. It's about giving yourself the freedom to start over. Every step I took away from the past was a step toward a future built on honesty, strength, and hope. One quiet evening, I invited a few close friends over to celebrate the new beginning. We gathered around a low table, the soft glow of the city lights seeping through the large windows. As we raised our glasses, I felt a deep, genuine warmth. "To fresh starts," I said simply, my voice steady and clear. Their cheers echoed in the room, and in that moment, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. A few months later, the rumors about Lauren only confirmed what I had suspected all along. She had lost everything she tried to hold on to. I heard that she had been forced to rely on her parents, and even her friends were starting to distance themselves, tired of her constant lies and broken promises. It wasn't my concern anymore. I had moved on to a life where I was the master of my own destiny. Sitting in my new luxury condo, I often found myself thinking about that final move, the quiet yet firm checkmate that had sealed our fate. I sipped my whiskey and looked out at the city, feeling a mix of satisfaction and peace. The victory wasn't bitter or cruel. It was the natural outcome of a life lived with truth. I had served my revenge with calm precision, and now I was free to enjoy the best birthday present I could ever ask for. The chance to live a life that was entirely, wonderfully my own. In the end, I understood that sometimes the best revenge is simply to move forward. I had learned to let go of the past and embrace the future with open arms. And as I sat there, under the soft glow of city lights, I knew that my best days were ahead, days filled with hope, honesty, and the simple joy of knowing that I was finally in control of my own destiny. This was my checkmate, my final goodbye to the life that once was, and the warm welcome to a brighter tomorrow. I sat in my new condo, the city lights twinkling outside like a promise of fresh beginnings, and let the quiet of the night settle around me. It had been several months since that fateful birthday, and the echoes of the past were now just distant memories. I knew that the wounds of betrayal would take time to heal, but every day I felt a growing sense of strength. I recalled the look on Lauren's face when the truth was revealed, the shock, the anger, and finally, the crushing defeat. It was as if she had been forced to stand before everyone and admit that her carefully laid plans had failed, and in that moment, I had delivered my checkmate. Looking back, I realized that every step of the journey had been necessary. The eviction notice, the silent whispers around the dining table, even the weight of those disappointed eyes. It all led to this final turning point. I had built everything with my own two hands, sacrificing time, money, and endless effort to create a home that was truly mine. And when she tried to tear that away with her schemes and lies, I simply took back control. I had played my cards well, and every move I made was calculated to protect what belonged to me. It wasn't about hurting her for the sake of revenge, but about standing up for my own truth and reclaiming my life. I remembered the day I left that house for the last time. I had taken a deep breath and stepped out, not as a broken man, but as someone who finally understood the value of self-respect. I watched the old house fade into the distance, a relic of a life built on false promises and deceit. With every mile I drove away, the memories of that painful night grew fainter, replaced by a quiet hope for the future. I found solace in small routines, a morning walk along quiet streets, a late-night call with Ethan, the gentle reassurance in Daniel's low chuckle when he said, "That's ice cold, bro." Their support had meant more than I could ever say. Now, As I sat there in my luxury condo, I thought about the irony of it all. Lauren had once believed she could control everything, that she could force me out and take over the life I had built. Instead, she lost not only the house, but also her grip on our shared world. Word had spread quickly. Rumors of her moving back in with her parents, of her credit in shambles, and her boyfriend disappearing like a ghost in the night. It was a quiet form of justice, a natural consequence of her actions. I didn't revel in her downfall, but I couldn't help feeling that the universe had finally balanced the scales. I had fought for my life and won, not with anger or cruelty, but with calm determination and careful planning. I took out a set of brand new keys from my pocket, a symbol of my new beginning. I smiled softly to myself as I ran my fingers over them. They weren't just keys to a new apartment or a penthouse. They were keys to my own destiny, to a life where I would no longer be defined by someone else's lies. I remembered the exact moment I first held those keys, the day when the realization hit me that I could choose my own path. The memory filled me with warmth and a quiet thrill. I had not only escaped a toxic relationship, but had also built a future free from betrayal. In that moment, I raised a glass of whiskey and made a silent toast to the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the bitter taste of revenge that some might celebrate, but for me, it was always about reclaiming what was lost and setting things right. Every late night spent worrying, every moment of fear and anger, had led me to this calm, steady state of being. I no longer felt the sting of the past, only the gentle excitement of a future that was entirely mine. I sat back and let the memories drift by, each one a lesson learned, a mistake corrected. I felt grateful for the support of my friends and the unexpected kindness of those who had seen through the facade for what it was. My life was now filled with small, honest moments, a quiet conversation over coffee, the simple joy of a morning sunrise, and the knowledge that I was free to love and live as I chose. In the end, I had served my revenge with a bow on top, not out of bitterness, but as a declaration of my newfound freedom. As the night grew deeper and the city continued its quiet hum outside my window, I knew that I had reached the final chapter of this long, winding journey. Checkmate wasn't a moment of cruelty. It was the sweet, calm end to a game that I had played with my heart and soul. I had taken back control, not just of a house, but of my entire life. And with that knowledge, I felt more alive than ever. My future was bright, my choices were mine, and as I closed my eyes, I smiled at the thought of all the new beginnings waiting just around the corner.